Hello, everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership. Now, this is something we've discussed a bit indirectly in several of our previous episodes, as well as in our videos. But leadership is a very big topic that's relevant just about everywhere in your life, obviously not just airsoft. At its core, leadership is simply the skill by which you influence or guide people into acting in a particular way, generally the way you want them to act. And when it comes to airsoft, there's a certain mystique to being a quote-unquote combat leader, largely promoted by their portrayal in like TV and movies, but also the fame of so-called celebrity generals like George Patton, Mad Dog Mattis, and all that stuff. And it can certainly sound cool to be barking orders on the field and getting people to do what you want them to, but leadership is more than that. There's this idea that exists that some people are said to be natural-born leaders, but the truth is that leadership is a skill like any other, which means that to be good at it, it requires careful practice and consideration. And although we've talked about it a bit generally here, leadership is not really that straightforward. I mean, first of all, just because you're a leader on paper, like that's your title or whatever, that doesn't mean that people will actually want to follow you, nor does it mean that you'll actually be a good leader even if people do agree to follow you. As well, just because you're not officially a leader doesn't mean that other people don't look to you for de facto leadership, right? And finally, even if you are a leader, and people agree to follow you, do you have the experience and strategic know-how to utilize your people effectively? And for today's discussion, that's what Pat and I are really going to talk about. We want to go over sort of the fundamentals of leadership, obviously. So how can you convince people to listen to your ideas, number one? But also, what does it actually mean to be a true leader and a good leader? And finally, how can you apply your leadership in a strategic capacity on the airsoft field? So with that being said, sort of let's dive in and let's start off with sort of the fundamentals of leadership.
And I feel like probably a good starting point for us, honestly, is to stress, and I know we've said this before, but, as much as we all love watching, Full Metal Jacket, the Full Metal Jacket gunnery sergeant approach is not a good way to try to lead people.
Totally.
Really. It's very cinematic, it's very appealing in some ways there, but it's not something that works, practically speaking, in, air quotes, real life.
For sure, and I think we talked a little bit about this when we were talking to Cal about what it's like being a real soldier versus airsoft, and the bottom line is that airsoft is not the real military. I mean, you might think that it is, but you're wrong, it's not. And with that comes two caveats here. The first is that because it's not the real military, this is not a job for people. People are not signing up to come and, work for you or whomever, and therefore are okay with, being yelled at and shouted at and so on, because that's part of the job. That's not fun for most people. I mean, yeah, you got crazy people who love being yelled at, and maybe that's fun for them, but the average person going to a weekend skirmish isn't doing that to get yelled at, for one thing. And then secondly, in real world applications, the stakes are much higher. You're yelling at people and shouting at people to do things. Because the battlefield is very loud potentially, but also because you need to get your point across because they might actually get themselves killed or get a teammate killed or what have you, right?
And to be clear here, there is a practical difference between Phil, shouting halfway across the field at me to get my stupid ass in cover, and Phil, yelling at me because he feels like I'm, air quotes, doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And he's definitely done the first a lot, and I don't think he's ever done the latter, right? Yeah. And, unlike a lot of people who I play airsoft with, Phil knows that I'm a giant softie, so he's not like, oh, Pat's gonna eat me. He's like, no, I just wouldn't do that to people.
The other thing is that, when you're playing airsoft, me yelling at Pat is one thing. We've known each other forever. And with that comes, a lot of latitude. Like I've said stuff to Pat and then immediately regretted and apologized and moved on. I mean, that's just part of, being friends with people for a really long time.
And vice versa. Dumb shit happens,
Yeah, totally. Right. And that's fine for us. But if you go to the airsoft field and you just start yelling at random people, firstly, they might not know you. And secondly, they don't have to listen to you. Right? Just because you're there and barking orders and doing this, that, the other thing, people can just go like, who the hell is this guy? I'm not listening to him. He's an asshole, right? Or whatever, right? Which is not doing you any favors.
And I know we mentioned this, but in practical terms, they're also not getting paid to listen to you, and that like really does make a difference
Totally.
in the forces situation, right? Like we had Cal on, but I know for sure that there's stuff he puts up with at work because it's work and he's getting paid, right?
Totally. And I think that's true of anyone, whether you're in the military or not. Like if you're at work, you'll put up with stuff that, you know what, in your real life, you might say, I'm not dealing with this.
I assure you, I get things said to me by teenagers as a teacher that I'm like, whatever, as a teacher, that, if I were just like randomly out in public, I would be significantly less polite in my rebuttal.
Totally. Right. The first thing that, as we've sort of been highlighting so far, is that people don't have to listen to you. And the other thing too is that if you're in a community and stuff and you've been playing for a while, you may also have a reputation, right? And that reputation could help people listen to you because they know who you are and they know your skills, but it could also hinder you in the sense that people may not like you for whatever reason. So how do you actually overcome this, right? How do you get from a place where you have an idea that you want, to get people to do on the field? How do you get them to actually do that thing, right? And our thesis in this is that yelling at them is not going to do the job. So then how do you get there?
A little later in this episode, we'll also talk about how does this translate into a skill that you can help to grow into being a leader in your community? And also, how does it translate into maybe sort of overlapping into other parts of your life? Because one of the cool things about hobbies is that you can learn skills that transfer and translate into, air quotes, real world stuff into other parts of your life in meaningful fashions. And that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're thinking about leadership in airsoft in particular, one of the things that you really want to remember, especially when it comes to airsoft and, your own ambitions in terms of leadership, it's that in stressful situations or in situations where people feel unfamiliar, there is a desire to be led, right? If you don't know what you're doing or you're in a situation that is high stakes, and although airsoft may not seem high stakes, when we're under stress, our bodies don't really know the difference, right? There's a desire for most people to attach themselves to someone who they consider, okay, no, they've got a plan, they know what they're doing, right? And so you can certainly utilize that to your advantage. If you have an idea, if you have a plan that you want to execute, it's pretty simple for you to speak up and say, hey guys, I have an idea. And the great thing about airsoft is because this isn't a workplace, because this is not the real military, there is no defined hierarchy. Now that's of course outside of like a milsim event or whatever. If it's a random skirmish on a weekend, nobody there is an assigned leader. So you have an opportunity to share your ideas and get stuff done. But again, there are situations where you might say, guys, I want to do this. And people go, nah, I don't want to do that. Then what do you do, right?
And I mean, that's going to be your reality some of the time, right? One of the things I want to talk about is sort of, to speak to the hierarchy thing is like our airsoft team, uses sequence numbers. So people are often like, oh, Phil must be in charge because he's SO1, and like in milsim games and stuff, that may be the case. But on your average Saturday, everyone on our team is going, I got this idea. And we're going, yeah, wicked, great, And sometimes it's a silly idea and we're like, let's try it. Why not? We have literally played games where our pre-game planning session was, all right, let's run really, really hard to that corner and see what happens. Okay.
Yeah.
But, we're also super willing to take input, to take, air quotes, orders from people we've played with before, people who haven't played with before, who are like, let's try this idea. And it's like, sure, why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the nice things in airsoft relative to, real combat is like, yeah, if I get shot, who cares, right? So let's give it a try. We have a lot of tactical flexibility there in terms of trying new and stupid things.
So fundamentally, like we said at the start, leadership is all about influencing, right? It's all about influencing people to do certain things. And before you start down this path, the first thing you need to really consider is, why is it that you want to be a leader, right? Why is it that you want to be in charge? And if it's because you want to boss people around, that's probably not the right place for you to be looking, right?
And I think that in some ways, like most of us will probably have encountered that player who's just, who wants to tell people to do stuff. And I've found that in a lot of ways, like the people who are like that, who are jerks, to be honest with you, tend to get themselves sorted out fairly quickly by the rest of the community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but this is definitely one of those like advice on how not to be that guy moments for us.
Totally. Absolutely. And then there's also this notion of like, well, I should be in charge because I've been playing the longest and I'm the best player. And again, if that's your rationale for wanting to be a leader or, you know, to be the one who come up with the strategy and organize the players, again, you're not looking in the right place, right? Because leadership fundamentally is not about being the best or the smartest player on the team. In fact, being a good leader is just about being able to recognize that you are good at being a leader. You're good at coordinating people, not necessarily being the best on the team. And so if you think about, you know, the roles that like myself and Pat have filled in over the years of being a leader on like when it comes to like operation games or objective-based games or what have you, we didn't do those because we're the best player, because in fact, we are not the best player. If I look at, you know, members of the team, I can list several people who I feel are significantly better players than I am. But are those people better than me at coordinating multiple different people? Would they be able to do that as effectively as me? Probably not, because I have more experience doing that, and that's something that I'm, you know, relatively good at.
And that, like, you know, the running a team or running like a unit in a milsim game skill set is, you know, one part sort of communicative leadership, so one part talking to people and communicating ideas and managing personalities and interests. Right? Because like you've got the guys who want to go patrol, make sure they're patrolling. You've got the guys who want to go shoot people, make sure they're, you know, getting some trigger time, trying to make sure people get like rotate around and are in places where they're useful. And there's a how good are you at picturing a large scale area in your head and or doodling things on a little map that you've brought with you to have like an idea of where your guys are and what they're doing at any given time, which is an entirely separate, I would say, leadership oriented skill.
Absolutely.
I would also note that I'm sort of, I think, comfortably in the middle of the skill level of my teammates in terms of like personal skills. You know, I'm an okay shooter. You know, I'm okay at using cover. I'm okay at getting from point A to point B and dealing with problems and stuff like that. In terms of like, air quotes, book smarts, you know, I've definitely read more stuff on tactics and strategy than most of the people we play with. And I feel like that does parse out into like, I'm probably one of the better people on the team at generating a tactical plan for what we want to accomplish. I'm not actually necessarily one of the better people at motivating the guys to get up and go do it effectively.
Yeah, and I mean, we can talk about that a little bit later, I think the difference between strategy and tactics. But I think so what we were talking about before around recognizing your own skills and your people's skills and stuff, I mean, fundamentally, if you want to be a good leader, being a good leader is all about seeing the people's strengths who actually are making up your team and seeing those strengths as a complement to your weaknesses or the areas that you're probably not as good at, rather than a challenge to your own ability and your own authority, right? And if you can see the people's on your team's skills as a compliment to you rather than challenge to you, just like I can look at Cal and I can look at Chris and I can look at John and go, yeah, those guys are better than me, but that doesn't make me worse. That just helps me be a better player.
And let's stick with those three guys as an example, right? So John is a really good player and has developed really marvelously in the last couple of years as a sort of person who can motivate the guys around him on our team and off our team to do better. But those are new skills for him in the last couple of years. You know, and that's an area he's personally, I know, worked to develop, and it's rocking. Chris is an excellent player. Like, he's probably the highest, he and Cal are probably the highest personal skills on our team, in my view. But from a leadership point of view, like if I'm in charge of a larger op, the thing that makes Chris super valuable is that he's a force multiplier. Right? He is fantastic at gluing a group of guys together and getting them to do the thing I need to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you've really touched on is what good leadership is all about. It's, you know, being able to coordinate all those people. And the best way that you can do that is actually by talking to people and understanding and listening to them. And when we talked right at the beginning around like how do you get people to actually do the thing that you want them to do? How do you get them to listen to you if you're not going to bark at them and tell them, hey, go do this, and swear at them or whatever? The key way that you do that is by listening to them to boost their confidence in you as a player. Because again, if they're not really sure, or they're under stress or what have you, they likely want to be led. What they need from you is to know that actually, you know what? This guy's got this, right? This guy knows what he's doing. He's got his head on straight. I can trust him to do the thing that is, the point of the game. And the only way that you can do that is by building that trust. And they either do that because they know who you are, and that sort of comes with that stamp of approval, or because they have seen you in action before, right? The proof is in the pudding, so to speak. They've played with you and they know, oh yeah, Pat knows what he's doing. He's a really good commander. I'm happy to work for him. Whatever plan he comes up with, that's great. But on the flip side, if they don't know you from Adam, right? The first time you're meeting them and you look at them and say, okay, guys, do you have any ideas? What do you guys want to do? Right? Because again, this isn't work, right? Like, people are doing this for fun. So the best way that you can get that buy-in from them is to say, guys, what is it that you want to do? And when they say, oh, I'd like to do this, that, the other thing, you think about how that fits into your strategic plan and you go, yeah, that's a great idea. Go ahead and do that, right? And the advantage is that in some cases, they are going to suggest the very thing that you wanted them to do, except now they came up with the idea. So you just say, yeah, that's a great idea. Go ahead and do it. So it doesn't feel like you've told them to do anything. Right? To them, they're like, oh, I'm just doing what I wanted to do. But for you, it fits perfectly in your plan.
And they're additionally enthused because they've sort of tossed their idea out there and gotten someone to go, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do it, which is beneficial to them and to their performance, right? So sort of competence and confidence are really, really important aspects of this, right? Exuding confidence, being, sort of demonstrably like, yeah, I'm good with where this is going. I'm good with being in charge here. I have an idea of how to front, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely.
But so is modesty, right? Like, there's a lot of value in listening, right? A good leader listens more than they talk a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And it's not just about listening. It's also, like you were saying, about the modesty and the humility of recognizing the people around you, being like, hey, you know what? You do this way better than I do. So would you be okay with doing that? Right? So I know that you're much better on, this particular task than I am. But so by recognizing their skills, you can give them specific tasks to do that gives them a bit of responsibility and ownership into the overall, mission or objectives or what have you, which is a huge part of getting people to contribute to their fullest. If it was their job to lead a group of guys on the left side, at the end of the game, even if they lose, if the left side was solid the whole time, they can go, hey, you know what? We lost, but I did a great job on the left side, right? So that's part of that, building that sort of like teamwork and building that confidence in your leadership.
And it gives them ownership, right? It means that, you're playing the team leader, but they're playing, someone who's part of the team, and they get to feel active ownership of that team. And as though they're, contributing both, like in the physically being in a place and doing the thing, shooting at enemies kind of way, but also in a organizational and like task setting way. And that gives them a lot of motivation.
Absolutely. Right? And to be clear, you can't achieve that by yelling and shouting at them. You can't achieve that ownership. You can't achieve that sense of sort of pride and accomplishment in their own skills and their own gameplay by shouting and barking at them to do something. Because then, in most players' cases, they may feel just sort of resentment, being like, fine, I'm doing it, but I don't really want to.
Yeah, most people are going to be disenfranchised by you screaming at them, not brought into the, into the moment or into the game.
And this might seem like it's just a semantic difference, but really it absolutely isn't, right? It is the key difference between having someone who is willing and able to do something and will take the initiative to do it well versus someone who's just going to end up doing half-heartedly exactly what you said and no more. And in Airsoft especially, it's really, really important to have people who are engaged and willing to take that initiative rather than just do the bare minimum, because that's how you win games.
It's a mentality thing. It's a mindset thing, right? You need your players to be in it to win it, right? And if you're yelling at people, they might do what you're asking them to do. They might do what you're, I guess, sort of trying to intimidate them into doing. but they're not going to be happy about it necessarily. In fact, probably they're not going to be happy about it at all. And if they're unhappy about what you're proposing they do, they're definitely not going to go all in, right? They're not going to give you sort of that extra 10% that you need to win a lot of the time.
Absolutely. So what this looks like in practice for us is that, and we've sort of talked about it and alluded to it a little bit, but before an objective game, whoever is on our team, generally speaking, there's at least going to be one person who is going to jump up as a sort of a de facto leader, or at least start the conversation around objective and planning, right? That might be me, that might be you, but it could just be as casual as saying, all right, guys, so what's the plan? What are we doing?
And often is exactly that sentence.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And that's why I said it, because that's what I say almost every single game. It's like, what's our plan? Right? And I do that not because I don't know, although in some cases, and perhaps even many cases, I have no idea what we should do, right? And that's okay. But I would rather hear people's opinions before I start telling them what I think we should do. Because again, someone might come up with the idea that is my idea. And in that case, I can just say, wow, what a great idea. Let's do that. And so now we're not doing Phil's idea. We're doing, whomever's idea. However, I have already thought this out in my head, and I have some ways that I think that on a tactical or perhaps even strategic, if the situation is quite large, I've already have some idea from a tactical or a strategic level of how we can implement and achieve that particular objective, right? But now we're doing so because it's someone else's idea, and you get that buy-in. It's like, all right, well, Phil might be in charge, but he said we're doing Johnny's idea. So you know what? It's on Johnny now, right? And so that changes again the dynamic. So we start off the conversation by saying, so guys, what are we doing? And just that is enough to have that conversation.
And let's not undersell the fact that, quite regularly people are like, hey, what if we did this? And you go, oh, that's way better than my idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other piece is, once you understand overall what the team is wanting to achieve and like what angle of attack they want to take or how they want to play the field or what have you, you can then look at your players around you, and you as a leader will know who is probably best to do certain tasks. You can look at their equipment for one thing and go, all right, well, that guy, has a bolt action, so he's probably not going to be good on this particular area because there's normally lots of fighting there, but they might be really good here because there's a good fire lane, right? Or you might look at the team and say, all right, well, these three guys are renters, so they don't have a lot of range, but they want to shoot a lot because that's fun for newer players. So let's put them up front where they can shoot tons, right? You can make some of those decisions and understand where your people will be most effective in order to accomplish whatever game plan you have.
And you can make use of sort of the thinking man's approach to that, right? In the sense that, so if we talk about, just that sort of subset of people, so we've got a guy with a bolt action, right? Take the 60 seconds to go, hey man, do you want to be slightly backline? Do you want to rock, like as our second line and provide sort of spot solving of problems? Because you're probably going to be more effective like that. And that player's going to go, yeah, man, that's why I bought this gun, right?
Yeah.
But that puts them in the position they want to be in. It means you're making thoughtful use of your assets as, again, air quotes, a commander. And then you look at the renters and go, okay, if these guys are brand new and we've never seen them before, let's take the 60 seconds to run them through like what basic fire and move looks like. Because, man, are they going to be extremely useful for the fire part of fire and move?
Totally. And they'll be jazzed about it too. Like they'll do it like they'll put their whole heart into it because it's fun, right?
Yeah, and it's fun. They get to feel like a badass. And, like I feel like the more seasoned a player you are, the more likely you are to be okay with a job that doesn't involve shooting a shit ton.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
And like I remember when I started playing Airsoft, like Phil was like, Pat, you should be shooting on semi. And I was like, but full auto is more fun.
Yeah.
Right. And, we've also had players on our team for whom full auto is more fun, never stopped being a thing. And that's very much a player you can utilize. It's very much a player who can be effective. But it is a player that requires a little bit like, oh, let's put him over here so that he's doing the right thing, right? Like we know, oh yeah, like we're going to need a lot of weight of fire on this fire lane. All right, we will put Jeremy right there because he loves him that trigger held down.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. To sort of close that discussion off a little bit, it's important to understand the people on your team, right? And the only way that you're going to understand those dynamics is by listening, right? By being sort of an active participant in terms of what is the dynamic that's in front of me, right? Who are the players there? What do they want to do? By asking the questions and really soliciting their opinions. But on the flip side of that, the trap that you don't want to fall into is not being decisive enough. Because there will be tons of different opinions, right? There will be situations where, oh, maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do that. All of which might be good ideas, but what you can't do is be indecisive. You can't just say, oh, well, we'll have to do this or have to do that. It's like you need to have a plan and stick to it. And the beauty of Airsoft is that nobody's going to die. So if you do something and it doesn't work, generally speaking, what you can do is learn from it and then next time go, man, you know what? I'm probably not going to do that again.
And I mean, you have the added benefit of, like, most Airsoft games are relatively quick. You know, like most sort of Saturday afternoon skirmish games are relatively quick. So if you try a thing and it wasn't great, all right, cool, re-rack and try it again.
So let's just recap overall. The key thing about being a leader and an effective leader is that you want to listen to your teammates. You want to be aware of what their skills are and what their particular preferences are compared to yours and where they're stronger or weaker than you are. You want to ask for their opinions, right? You want to do the things that your team wants to do rather than try and force them to do whatever it is that you want to do. And you certainly don't want to bark orders at them to tell them what they should be doing. Yelling at people in the middle of a game is certainly one thing, but when it comes to acting on the field, you know, barking at people to do something, to, you know, take that corner, run out of cover, do this, do that, is not going to achieve what you're wanting to do, right? You're going to want to be more collaborative than that, especially given the fact that, like we said at the very, very start, nobody is here to get paid and nobody is going to die. So there's really no urgency to the kind of barking orders that you sort of see in the military.
Absolutely. And, like, you're not paying anyone, right? Unless you are, in which case, very different play experience from mine.
Yeah, for sure. So then the other piece to leadership really is, and we said this at the start, it's like, yeah, so you can get people on board, right? You can get people to do what you want to do. You can get them to act on the field and take the initiative and be engaged and take ownership of whatever it is that you're asking to do. And all that is great. But how do you know what you should do, right? How do you know what a good idea is and what a bad idea is? And finally, I think one of the key questions that people need to think about, especially when it comes to Airsoft, is what is the difference between strategy and tactics, right? And how are those differences actually meaningful to you as a leader when you're playing Airsoft?
This is a really important factor to think about, right? There have been books written about strategy and tactics and the difference between strategy and tactics for 3,000 years. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing for me because in some ways I ought to be one of the better people on our team at that distinction and at playing with the strategic angle of things, especially because I've read a significant quantity of that material. You know, it's an interest of mine. It's a thing I read for fun. So strategy is broadly, especially in terms of Airsoft, right? Like, you can talk about, like, the grand overarching strategy is not likely to be a thing in most Airsoft games, you know?
Yeah, milsim games aside and stuff.
Yeah, and even in a milsim game, you know, like, you're not necessarily going to have 300 guys aside or 3,000 guys aside to have, you know, like, oh, I will move my tank division here kind of strategizing, yeah. Right? Yeah. And, like, logistics and supply is comparatively a trivial problem for an Airsoft player, even in a bigger milsim game. So, you know, tactical skill is, in Airsoft, essentially you're like, what am I going to do in the moment, right? So me and my two guys have a plan, and we're going to execute that plan. And this can be as literally like, okay, you know, bounding movement. Yeah, we're moving tactically, right? We're moving in a way that makes logical sense in terms of what we're doing right now. And it requires sort of, you know, moment-to-moment planning, if you will. Whereas strategy is, okay, so what is our larger overarching goal and how are we going to accomplish that goal?
Absolutely. And I think being an effective leader is understanding that strategy and tactics exist on the same, for lack of better imagery, they exist on a ladder, right? And strategy is at the top and tactics is at the bottom. And in any given situation, you can be anywhere on that ladder, right? So if you're in, let's say it's a mission, an objective-based game that you're playing, and let's say it's an hour-long game, you might find that you spend most of your time in that tactical area, right? Trying to make tactical decisions, minute by minute decisions, etc. However, every now and then, you know what your overarching objective is, and you need to sort of climb that ladder a bit towards the strategy to see, hey, hang on, how does what we're doing right now impact what we are trying to achieve on the field? And where leaders are very effective is when they're capable of making that transition both constantly and quickly.
Absolutely.
Right? Because one of the things that is a trope that and I've seen this, I don't know how many times, is people who read like infantry manuals, and I mean, I have one in particular, people who read infantry manuals and they read the Art of War, etc. And they're like, all right, so I'm going to the airsoft field and there's a game of 20 people. And because I've read the Art of War and I've read these infantry manuals, I am now an expert in strategy. And that's just not correct, because the world that you're going into is a world that's primarily steeped right now in tactics. That's what you need, with a little bit of strategy.
And, academic knowledge does not translate to practical skill, right?
Well, that part aside, absolutely agree.
Like, I can read as much of Caesar as I want to. That doesn't mean that everything will go the way Caesar says it should or thinks it should on a strategic level. And he doesn't talk about the tactical level at all, really, because that's not what he was concerned about.
And I think people need to recognize that it actually works the other way around too. Like, we see these like videos of like special forces operators, like Navy SEALs and stuff, like doing kill houses and doing like swift boat runs and, rappelling out of a helicopter and doing all this really cool stuff, right? And these are high level tactical operators. And you're like, wow, these guys are crazy skilled. And all that is true. But if you put them in front of a map and say, hey, you need to coordinate these 3 or 4 different elements, they might have zero experience with that. And that doesn't make them a good leader, right? They can lead a team of guys through a building, but that's tactical knowledge. And that's different than strategic thinking. Those two things exist on the same spectrum, but in very, very different areas.
One of the results is that, like, I am probably a pretty okay strategist as far as airsoft goes. Between the knowledge base I have and the amount of it I've played, right? I'm also not a bad tactician at airsoft, in the sense that, like, if I need to get my team through a set of objectives in a immediate moment-to-moment way, I can definitely do that too. But I would say Chris is a better tactician than I am. Karu is absolutely a better tactician than I am. He does this for a living, right? In terms of sort of like the strategic aspect of it, I probably do actually have both of them, matched, if not, a little better than them, and part of it's because I've done more airsoft team leading stuff than either of them have. Chris is not super into it. And Kyle is just, it's a hard nope for him because he's too close to doing that stuff at work a lot of the time. It's just like, no, I'm here for fun. Right.
So, I mean, what does that mean to you as an airsofter who is thinking about leadership as it relates to airsoft? Well, it's all fine and good for you to be able to understand the difference between strategy and tactics like we've talked about, but what does that mean in practical terms for you? Well, what it means is that, number one, if you're going to come up with a plan or a strategy that you want to implement, you also need to be able to consider how tactically that is going to be achieved. So, for example, if you are on the field and your overall objective is to take a particular point on the map or whatever, and you want your team to push, do a center push and a left flank push, you need to be thinking about how is it that my team is actually going to be able to accomplish that left-hand flanking maneuver or what have you, because tactically that needs to happen. And so if you're sitting there going like, why aren't they pushing left? I don't understand. Like, I'm going to go shout at them to push left harder. If they don't have an avenue of attack, if they don't have the support that they require, if they're not able to, execute fire and maneuver on their side in order to be able to do that push, well, then there's no way for you to actually affect that on the battlefield. So as a leader, you need to be able to manage those two considerations, right? Tactically, how are you going to achieve what you need to do so that, strategically you can get to where you need to go?
And you need to be listening to that dialogue, right? If you have someone acting as your team lead who you've sent with a group of guys to flank left, and he goes, hey, we're stuck. We have hit just, the limit of our ability to advance. We cannot push forward here. The correct response from a leadership point of view isn't to say, well, go harder.
Yeah, or just make it work.
It's to say, okay, well, can I use these guys where they are, right, to set up something else somewhere else? Or do I need to tell them, okay, fall back and move?
Or, you know, like what needs to happen for those guys to be able to advance? It's like, well, there's 4 guys behind cover and we just can't get them. Okay, well, maybe we can get rid of those guys some other way.
Yeah.
Right?
What assets do I have available? What can I do to change the situation so that what I need to happen happens?
Yeah, absolutely. The final consideration really about leadership is that being a good leader doesn't mean that you're making the right decisions all the time. And in fact, we've talked about this before, but like you are going to make bad decisions. Things are going to go sideways. Things are not going to go the way that you wanted them to. And so being a good leader is also about being able to look at that and have a conversation with your team to say, all right, guys, what exactly happened? What went off the rails, right? And how can we make sure that that doesn't happen again?
To borrow one of Phil's favorite phrases, what are our even better ifs?
Totally. Yeah. Like that could have gone even better if we had done this or that. And the reality is you might not be able to have that dialogue with everyone, especially if like your whole team is just randoms and stuff. But if you have the opportunity to just even do a quick debrief, we talk about this a lot, like after actions are really, really important. And being a good leader is about facilitating those conversations, asking people without judging them. It's like, hey, so like what happened? Right? Because you need to understand. And you might think, well, Phil, like this is a game. Like, why do we even care about this kind of stuff? Like, why is this so important? Well, it's important for 2 reasons. Because like we always say, like if you want to get better at this, you need to, you know, really sort of critically assess how you're doing things. But number 2 is if you're trying to be a leader, you need to show people that you actually do care. Right? This is important to you. It's something that, you know, you take seriously. And what we mean here is not that you're serious about it, but rather that you know, it's something that matters to you and that you're willing to put in the time. And when people see you do that, then that builds their confidence in your leadership ability as well.
Part of being a good leader is demonstrating that you care and that you're in it, right? And that you're there essentially to win and that you're going to think about, okay, how did my leadership affect my team? How did they benefit or not from what I was telling them to do and from what we were trying to get done during the game? So you need to be asking people, hey, how did this go? You know, what happened there? Partly because it gives you opportunities to help your players refine their skill sets and improve, but also because it gives you a chance to reflect on what you were doing and gives you a chance to reflect and improve. And you need to be clear, I think, with people that you're doing both, right? That you're trying to get everyone to step up their game and to improve their game and to increase their skills, including, in fact, especially you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I would be lying if I said I went to absolutely every game and spent every minute of every game of Airsoft I play trying to improve because, you know, none of us are always there 110% or 100%, right? But I try to put time into trying to work on my skills and improve what I'm doing and implement stuff I've been practicing every time I play. You know, sometimes I'm also going, YOLO, but
yeah, for sure.
You know, you shouldn't spend the entire game going YOLO, nor I think should you really spend the entire game, you know, going like, oh, serious face, game face on, unless that's just the way that things are the most fun for you. I think that a mixture of the two is the most reasonable way of dealing with this.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you raise a really good point there by saying, you know, YOLO or what have you. I think that's also part of understanding the difference between sort of whether, you know, strategy or tactics are applicable in the sense that in some cases you may just say, we don't really need a plan or, you know, we just have a vague idea of what we want to achieve. And that's fine. That's good enough. Right. Trying to be the kind of leader who tries to force the issue. Right? You have 10 guys and you're assigning like numbers to everyone on the team and saying, all right, you're number 1, you're number 2, you're number 3. And that's you respond to those numbers. Like that doesn't achieve anything. What you're trying to achieve with leadership, like we said right at the very beginning, is you want to influence people to do things on the field in the way that you think make the most sense. And whenever you try and force the issue, you're never going to get the result that you want. Right? So the best thing that you can do is understand when it's time to make a decision and be decisive, when it's time to let people do whatever it is that they want to do, or when it's time to adopt sort of like an interim, right? Like we were saying again, asking for opinions, soliciting what they want to do, figuring out what it is they want to do and working with that, right? And it's always this spectrum. Fundamentally, everyone who shows up at the Airsoft game has different things that they want from Airsoft. Right? Maybe they have a machine gun and that's what they want to shoot full auto all day. Maybe they want to be sneaky. Maybe they have a bolt action. They want to be a sniper, whatever that is, right? Everyone has a different reason for playing that particular day and overall in general. And you need to be adaptable as a leader to everybody's style, right? And that means that if you really want to be effective, you can't just take one blanket approach to airsoft leadership and just do that all the time, right? That's the fundamental piece behind it.
And one really important thing I want to throw out there is that, we've been saying, you need to be confident, but, don't front, right? Tell people the truth. Don't lie to your team. So if you try something and it goes wrong as a leader, there's genuine value in going, yep, so that was definitely my idea and it definitely didn't work. And we'll try that again, right? That honesty is an important part of this, right? And so accepting, not being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I got you all killed, but just going, yep, that didn't work. And being reasonable with people going, yeah, no, that one was not a great idea. All right, we'll try something else.
Yeah, or even asking, it's like, that didn't work. I'd like to hear more from you guys. I have some ideas as to why I think that didn't work. And in some cases, it might be obvious because it's like, that didn't work because we all got shot, Phil. Yeah, that's fair enough. But like in general, right? Like I have some ideas as to why that didn't work. I think I have some ideas of how we could have gone better or what we could have done differently. But what do you guys think? Right? And having that conversation. And again, it's easier said than done in some cases. But there's a lot of value in trying that sort of approach.
Yeah, asking for feedback is very, very critical. And I guess just the key point there is, honesty from like both sides, right? You should be asking people for feedback. They should be aware that you're not going to get, pissy if they go, well, I think the plan was a bad one, boss. Because that happens.
Absolutely.
Likewise, they need to be open. I am open to my teammates going like, Pat, you were 2 buildings back. You weren't combat effective. You weren't doing what we needed you to do. Step up more next time. That honest, like, hey, I need you to get out of your head. I need you to get back in the game. Or just, that didn't go super well, but like, let's not be bummed about it. Let's just go play some more, right? These are important things to be able to hear and sort of try to take your ego out of the equation as much as possible, right? Being a good airsoft player and a good airsoft leader is often about not letting yourself have ego about the idea of you being a good airsoft player or a good airsoft leader.
Well, yeah, and it's like I was saying at the start. I mean, part of being a good leader is understanding that your weaknesses and your shortfalls are not challenges to your own authority and ability, but rather there are areas where your teammates can help you fill that void, I should say, so that together as a team you're stronger, right? Rather than saying, oh, I'm bummed out because like Cal's better than me and nobody's going to want to listen to me because they know Cal's better than me. Well, that's not true. Right? That's not how that dynamic is supposed to work. So I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're in your current airsoft play, you're wanting to take on more leadership responsibility, my biggest piece of advice to you would be start listening to people more. You might have ideas, get people to tell you what they think we should be doing. And then you find areas where that sort of aligns what you were thinking and then start applying your own knowledge along with what your teammates are suggesting that you do, and roll those two things out in tandem. And then at the end of the day, you celebrate with the team if you're successful. If you fail, you can certainly commiserate, but the whole idea is you sort of talk about it and see what went well and what could be even better next time.
And there's a lot of space there to just sort of, adapt and polish stuff, right? So one of the things that is noteworthy is, if someone puts out a good idea and you can add another layer to it that makes it even better, great.
Take a yes and mentality. Right? So when people come up with ideas or they suggest stuff, a really good response is to take the mentality of yes and. So it's like, oh, well, I really want to attack on the left flank. Yes, that's a great idea. And why don't you also do this?
And this allows you to fine tune people's ideas. So if someone has an idea that is not as effective and it's not as effective, right? If you can say, oh yeah, but like, yes, and then we'll do this and make it something that works perfectly well for your plan, that's awesome because it keeps their motivation high. It keeps that engagement. It keeps that, oh yeah, I'm part of this process, in a way that being like, well, no, that's kind of stupid, is perhaps easier for you to spit out, but definitely not as helpful in terms of getting people on side and motivated.
Like Pat was saying, you need to consider the fact that you need to be honest with people, right? So if something is a bad idea, you also should feel, at liberty to say to those people, no, we can't do that. And here's why, right? Not just like, hey, no, that's a stupid idea. Unless you're talking to me, in which case, that's fine. But in general, like you want to take the approach of, no, we can't do that. Let me explain to you why we can't do that. Or let me explain to you why, in my experience, that's been a bad idea. And I don't think we should go down that route.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
That's fine.
Obviously, yeah, the honesty is king there. But like, it's a matter of, not being shitty to people, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you want to avoid being that guy who's just, yelling at people and telling people I'm in charge to do this. Right? Because we've seen that player, right? And I suspect most of you have seen that player, unless you're really new to Airsoft. And generally speaking, it doesn't work out well for them, so you don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So everyone, we hope you found sort of our rambling discussion about leadership entertaining and perhaps even educational. The reality is that leadership is a very well-researched, documented, very complex subject, and we could easily talk about this for hours and hours, and quite possibly we will certainly come back to this topic at some point. But we hope that you at least took a couple of nuggets out of this in terms of how you can apply this knowledge of leadership to your own airsoft in terms of your tactical and strategic airsofting, but also how you position yourself as a leader in your community. And we'd love to hear more about your experiences with leadership as well. And hopefully some of our tips will have helped you. And if so, we'd love to hear how. That being said, that's all we've got for you this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Have a good week, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.